Ahmed Fareed here with Todd Blackledge. Todd, I was going to call this the way too early Big Ten preview, but I feel like we're like sneaking up on the
Yeah,
beginning of the year here pretty quick.
we are. I mean, Labor Day weekend is not that far away, and week 0 is even closer than that. So it's right around the corner, and I think everybody's excited.
I forgot about that. We don't even start with week 1. It's when you're starting
Right.
in week 0, it really gets here early.
Yeah.
So what we're going to try to do here is we're going to go through some of the big picture thoughts, a preview of the Big Ten, some of the biggest storylines going into the year, but we'll try to get into the nitty gritty on many of the teams in the Big Ten this year. So let's just start at the top here, Todd. And Michigan's been the class of the conference for the past couple of years now, beating Ohio State.
Yeah.
Are they the team now to beat in the Big Ten? Is it Michigan's title to win every year now? Have they gotten that program to that top level?
You know, I would say this. I do believe they have gotten themselves to that level. I would not automatically say they're the team to beat, even though they are the two-time defending Big Ten champions. You know, Ohio State is still right there with them. Michigan has found a way to beat them the last 2 years. And it's really interesting when you look back even a few years ago, not that many years ago. You know, when Lloyd Carr was at Michigan, Michigan was what everybody thought Michigan was supposed to be: big, physical, Big Ten. The only knock on Michigan and Ohio State then was maybe they didn't match up with some of the SEC teams with speed and all that, but they were dominant teams in the Big Ten. And then a couple coaching changes at Michigan after Lloyd Carr, and they kind of fell off. They didn't recruit the same way. Meanwhile, Urban Meyer went to Ohio State, started recruiting with a SEC template, and all of a sudden Ohio State was way ahead of everybody. And in the last couple years, really only the last 2, Michigan has caught up to Ohio State. I mean, you can remember in 2020, they were ready to get rid of Jim Harbaugh. And you know, they had a bad year during the COVID season, but they came back in 21 and had a great year, made the playoff, beat Ohio State. And so right now, I think those two teams are very, very similar in the way their rosters look, the way they're recruiting, and their ability to make the playoffs and make a run at a national championship.
Yeah, I feel like that's becoming a yearly conversation now with Jim Harbaugh, either due to lack of performance around 2020 or now the NFL coming calling every year. So what do you think about Michigan's roster? Is it better than it was last year? They got the big running backs back, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, J.J. McCarthy coming back. Like overall, do you think Michigan could be better or about what they were last year?
I think they could be better for a couple reasons. Number one, you mentioned J.J. McCarthy. I mean, this is a guy that accounted for over 3,000 yards in his first year as a starter. He's a very good leader, a dual threat guy, and he got better and better. The more games he played, the better he played. So I think having all that under his belt, that's a huge edge for Michigan coming forward to this year. And one area where I think they have an edge over Ohio State and Penn State, who are both very, very talented teams, but breaking in new starting quarterbacks. The big question, and this is always the case when you have a running back returning from a knee injury, will Blake Corum return to his natural form? And how quickly will he return to form? Because before he got hurt, he was on his way to New York as a finalist for the Heisman. May not have won it, but deserved to be there before he got hurt in that Illinois game. He's one of the best players in the country and one of the 2 best players in the Big Ten, along with Marvin Harrison Jr. So how quickly he comes back. They've got 7 starters back on their defense, and Jesse Minter will be in his second year as a defensive coordinator there now. So I think they have the chance to be even better than they were a year ago.
Okay, so they might be the best team in the conference. Obviously debatable. Who has the best player, do you think, in the conference, Todd?
Well, again, I think the 2 best players are Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver of Ohio State, who's spectacular, and then I think Blake Corum, the running back at Michigan. I think those are the 2 best players in the league, and ironically, maybe the 3rd best player might be the other wide receiver at Ohio State, Emeka Egbuka. I mean, that duo is clearly the best in the country, and so, I mean, if you're a new quarterback like Kyle McCord, that's quite a luxury to be able to have those 2 guys to throw to.
Yeah, so let's get into that with Ohio State here. They're coming in, they're hungry. They've lost to Michigan now 2 years in a row. Ryan Day, it seems like if that continues to happen, no matter how many other games they win, he will continue to be on one of the hottest seats in the Big Ten. You mentioned those 2 great wide receivers. Are they going to be able to take advantage of them with what they have on offense with the quarterback coming in this year replacing CJ Stroud?
Well, I mean, that's not an easy guy to replace, right? I mean, he's a top NFL draft pick who had a brilliant career, but it helps having those guys. It helps having a good running game, which, they had some injuries at the running back position down the stretch last year. They lose a couple offensive linemen. I think both tackles left for the NFL, but they've recruited extremely well. And I think that they will replace and be ready to compete at the very highest level again. I mentioned Jesse Minter, defensive coordinator of Michigan, being in his second season. The same is true for Jim Knowles at Ohio State. He came from Oklahoma State. They were good for most of the year, but then didn't play as well in their two biggest games against Michigan and Georgia. But he's an excellent coach, and anytime you have those guys in your system for a second year, it makes a huge difference. So I would expect Ohio State to be outstanding this season again, even with a new quarterback.
Yeah, Todd, and you look at those defensive numbers last year, and they were all improved from what they were the year previously. But if you only watch their two biggest games, the two games at the end of the year, you would not have thought that was the case. So what do you think the pressure is on Ryan Day and that coaching staff for Ohio State? I mean, is this it's crazy when you look at it. They've lost in the college football playoffs. They've lost to Michigan a couple times, just a handful of games, but they've been the biggest games. Like, how much pressure are they under this year, you think?
Well, I think there's pressure because they're Ohio State, and I think Ryan Day would be the first to say, we want that pressure on us. We expect to win championships, Big Ten championships, and contend for national championships. I think any talk of a hot seat for Ryan Day is utter foolishness, though. I mean, he has done a great job there. But if you're the coach at Ohio State, you need to beat Michigan. If you're the coach at Michigan, you need to beat Ohio State. So that monkey is kind of off the back of Jim Harbaugh. But Ryan Day is dealing with that right now, and it's such a huge game. Honestly, I think where Ohio State has to step up is in those big games, the last 2 years against Michigan, and then last in the playoffs against Georgia, even though they had a chance to win that game. And if Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't get hurt, they might. They've been beaten in the trenches. They haven't been as good up front against those better teams. Michigan has been a better offense and defensive line than Ohio State the last 2 years. And I think, again, that last game at the end of the Big Ten season, you don't know what the weather's going to be like. It's going to be a physical game. And Michigan has been the more physical team the last 2 years those teams have played. And so for Ohio State to turn that around again this year, I think they've got to be better in the trenches.
I would guess that 95% of the prognosticators out there are going to pick either Michigan or Ohio State to win the conference this year. But I don't think that gives enough respect to Penn State and how they have built this program. I mean, they just lost to the two best teams in the conference, who were two of the best teams in the nation last year in Michigan and Ohio State. Could they upset the apple cart and somehow win this division over those two powerhouses?
Yeah, they could. I mean, there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of excitement around Penn State this year. And I think most of it is rightfully so. I mean, this is a talented roster. James and his staff have done a great job recruiting. I mean, they are really getting out there and bringing in prospects. They've helped themselves in the portal with a couple guys. The big question really is how quickly will Drew Aller, the five-star quarterback, how well will he play early, and how much can they count on him, particularly in those big games? He's got all the talent in the world, but, and he played a decent amount of snaps last year, but nothing like what he's going to be in, even in this first game against West Virginia as the starting quarterback. So he's super talented. It helps that I think their offensive line is probably the best that they've been in the last several years. They got a former or future first-round draft pick at left tackle. They've got two returning running backs that as freshmen combined for almost 2,000 yards and 22 touchdowns. So that's a good luxury for a quarterback to have is a strong running game as he eases in. And I think defensively, Penn State will be as good as either Ohio State or Michigan. I think they're going to be really good on defense. And again, Manny Diaz in his second year as the defensive coordinator, Penn State's defense, after they got blown out and run through up in Ann Arbor by Michigan, the second half of the season, their defense was much better and they were much more physical. And I think they'll be a really good defense. They've got a lot of talent. They've got depth. So, the big question, okay, how quickly does Drew Aller come around? And can they beat? I don't think they have to beat both Ohio State and Michigan to climb to that next level, but they do need to beat one of them. They have Michigan at home, and they've got to go to Ohio State. So they do need to beat one of them to kind of take the next step and potentially be in position for a college football playoff spot.
I mean, the way that you described, Todd, they're the Nittany Lions, and I don't know if that's just your history and your roots here, but it sounds like one of the best teams in the country. And I don't disagree with you either, because I think there are people that said out there that Manny Diaz might have one of the best, if not the best, defense in the country. And you mentioned what they can do on the offensive side of the ball with Singleton and Allen, those two running backs, Fashanu at the offensive line. Like, it all does come down, like you said, to Drew Aller. Like, the program, you've heard kind of like how much faith do they have that he can kind of live up to that potential that he had on the recruiting trail?
Well, I think they have a lot of confidence in him. I think they feel comfortable that he knows their system. He's been around, he's run it. But again, this is the first time, I mean, the lights are bright as a starting quarterback at a place like Penn State. And he's got all the talent. I think he's got the right temperament and demeanor, and he wants to be great. And so I think it'll be a game-to-game thing, where the better he plays and the more comfortable he is, the more they'll be able to give him and more responsibility they'll be able to give him. And again, I think they're going to lean on that running game and lean on their defense, in this early part of the season before they really get into the heavy part. And really, honestly, I think one of the most challenging games for Drew Aller and Penn State might be week 3 when they go to Illinois and take on Brett Bielema's team, because, they are a physical bunch. Brett has done a great job of changing the culture at Illinois in a very short amount of time. I had them last year against Michigan, the game Blake Corum got hurt, and Illinois, lost on a last-second field goal very easily. Could have won that game and won the Big Ten West. So that'll be an interesting, challenging game for Penn State and their new quarterback early in the season.
That's interesting because, Illinois, and I cover the NFL draft with my guy Chris Sims too, and he was raving about the secondary play from the two Illinois guys who got drafted high up in the first round, and if they can build on that somehow. And so let's go there. Maryland had 8 wins last year. Illinois had 8 wins last year. Of those two 8-win teams in the Big Ten, who do you think has a better chance of building on that success going into this season?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think both of those teams are going to be fun teams to watch. We talked about J.J. McCarthy. We talked about the new quarterbacks at Ohio State and Penn State. But the most experienced and the guy that's put up the biggest numbers in the league at quarterback is Talia Tagovailoa at Maryland, and he's back for another year. This is a really interesting team, an exciting team, because they can score a lot of points. They've not been able to stop people all that great on defense, but offensively, they've been really good. And I would expect them to have an outstanding season this year. It's interesting too, because a couple coaching changes. Mike Locksley brought in an old friend, Josh Gaddis, who they were together at Alabama. Josh Gaddis was offensive coordinator at Michigan when they made the playoff in 21, went to Miami. It didn't work out great for him there. He's back reunited with Locksley at Maryland. And also Kevin Sumlin, who is an outstanding offensive mind and has a great history. He's there with them. So some real strength on their coaching staff, a veteran, experienced, talented quarterback. And I think Maryland, is looking at this year, can we take that next step? And for them, it's going to have to be improvement on the defensive side of the ball. Illinois, they had it right there last year. I mean, they had the Big Ten West if they just took care of their own business. And they lost, I think, 3 games in a row down the stretch. They were all tight games and close ones. They're going to hope that they're going to be really good on the offensive line and defensive line. They did lose some key guys in the secondary. They lost their defensive coordinator, Ryan Walters, who's the new head coach at Purdue now. But they hired from within, so it's going to be the same system. And they're going to hope that they can hit it right with a transfer quarterback again, which is really the trend in the league, and all around college football. But last year they brought in Tommy DeVito from Syracuse. He played very well in his 1 year. Now they bring in Luke Altmaier, who was a very talented, highly recruited guy, that went to Ole Miss, but just couldn't beat out Jackson Dart. And so now we'll see if Illinois hits it right with their quarterback this time around.
Todd, you mentioned the coach they lost, Ryan Walters, now over at Purdue, and we have 3 new coaches in the Big Ten West. So I'm curious, who do you think is going to have the biggest impact year number 1 here? You got Matt Rule going over there to Nebraska, Luke Fickell at Wisconsin, and Walters at Purdue. Of those 3, who do you think makes the biggest impact year 1?
Yeah. First of all, I think they're all going to do an outstanding job. I had a chance this spring to go visit all 3 and watch practice, sit down with each of them. They're very different. They're different personalities. Ryan's a young guy, 36, 37 years old, his first head coaching opportunity, but he inherited some good players from Jeff Brom. He brought in a transfer quarterback in Hudson Card, who I think is a good player from Texas. Graham Harrell, his offensive coordinator. Those 2 guys will have a great connection offensively. I think of the 3 in year 1, I think Luke Fickell will have the biggest impact, because I think Wisconsin is closest to being a contender again, coming off of right around a 500 year last year. Paul Christ had it going for a while there and is an outstanding coach, but the last couple of years they fell off. And Luke Fickell, he's a proven commodity in what he did at Cincinnati. He's a Midwestern guy. He's a tough guy. And they went out and got a lot of guys in the portal. I mean, they brought in 3 quarterbacks out of the transfer portal, 4 wide receivers, some defensive guys, but they had a lot of good defensive players coming back. And they have a history of playing outstanding defense at Wisconsin. So, Jim Leonard is gone, longtime defensive coordinator, but Mike Tressel is an outstanding coordinator in his own right. So I think Wisconsin has a chance to contend for the West in Luke Fickell's year 1. I think Ryan Walters will do a good job, and I think Matt Rule will absolutely get Nebraska turned around. It may take a little longer, but he knows what he's doing. He's got a great track record in terms of rebuilding programs. He did it at places that are way harder to do it than at Nebraska. He did it at Temple, and he did it at Baylor in the wake of major scandal. Nebraska has everything you need to be great. And we need, not just NBC and the Big Ten, college football needs Nebraska to be good again and to be relevant again, because it makes the whole product better. It's one of the all-time great places. I've had the opportunity to call games there. I had the opportunity to play there as a player. And it's one of the great places in college football. And it's been 6 years since they've been to a bowl game or had a winning season. And Matt Rule will get that turned around.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great environment there at Nebraska, even when the team has been struggling over the past few years. And so, we don't need it, but I think it'd be kind of cool to see Nebraska get back to prominence. As you've mentioned, Matt Rule has done that where he's been before. At Wisconsin, they got Phil Longo there as offensive coordinator now. I mean, is this going to be a shock to the system of all Badger fans, how different this offense could look this year?
Well, it'll be different. They'll play at a faster pace. They won't huddle, and they might throw it a little bit more than what they were accustomed to seeing. But the thing that people have to remember is, Phil Longo's not a dummy. I mean, he's a smart offensive football coach that has been really good everywhere he's been. And I've covered him for a long time, both at Ole Miss and more recently in North Carolina. And he's not a just pass happy all over the lot kind of guy. I mean, it'll look different. There'll be more spread formations and they'll play at a faster pace. But he still is going to utilize what he can to be balanced and run the football. A couple of years ago, he had an offense at North Carolina where he had Sam Howell was a really good quarterback, but he had 2,000-yard rushers in the backfield and Michael Carter and Javonte Williams. So, he knows how to utilize a running game and a passing game, and he would be foolish not to realize he's got a running back coming back that gained over 1,000 yards. Wisconsin knows, they consistently have big, good offensive linemen. So he's not going to make a complete departure from what Wisconsin has been good at doing. It just might look a little bit different in its presentation.
Yeah, Braylon Allen's still going to get his run. You got Tanner Mordecai coming over there at quarterback, another transfer quarterback. And let's kind of look at the transfer quarterbacks here, because I think, for some of these teams, you're only as good as these guys play, at least on the
Right.
offensive side of the ball. And there's been a lot of them. You have Cade McNamara going from Michigan to Iowa. Hudson Card is at Purdue, coming over from Texas. Luke Altmaier, you mentioned, Ole Miss to Illinois. Taven Jackson goes from Tennessee to Indiana. And then Jeff Sims is a quarterback coming over from Georgia Tech, going to Matt Rule and Nebraska. We can touch on all these guys, but just right off the top of your head, who do you think of those guys kind of makes the biggest impact, or the team needs them to kind of make the biggest impact when they come in?
So, and we will touch a little bit on all of them, but I think in answer to that question, I think Cade McNamara going from Michigan to Iowa. And remember, this is a guy who, when Michigan made their run in 2021, he was the guy. He was the starting quarterback, and he played well. And, a lot of people early in the season thought, well, he's just a game manager, don't lose the game. But there were times down the stretch where he had to play big, and he did. And then he lost the job to J.J. McCarthy. And so, he went to Iowa. I'm sure he has got a huge chip on his shoulder and something to prove that he is a starting quarterback in the Big Ten. And to me, Iowa has been so good on defense. They just need something better to happen on offense. As good as they've been on defense the last couple of years, they've been equally poor on offense. And part of that, not all of it, but part of it has been quarterback play and inconsistent quarterback play. So I think if Cade McNamara can play like I know he's capable of, and like he proved at Michigan, and that offense improves, I really think Iowa and Wisconsin are the two teams to beat in the Big Ten West. And I think that's why I think Cade McNamara has the biggest impact to make. You mentioned Tanner Mordecai. This is his first year with Phil Longo and his last year of eligibility, but he played in wide open, similar kind of offenses, both at Oklahoma. Then he transferred to SMU and played for Rhett Lashley at SMU. Same kind of system, same kind of open offense. So he will take to that offense really well. Hudson Card, Hudson Card was a starter at Texas and, lost his job to Quinn Ewers, but he is a talented guy. And when I saw him in the spring, I was impressed with what he looked like just in his, not just his physical skills and running the offense, but just how the team responded to him. He hadn't been on campus that long, but just, he's clearly the guy there and the leader of that football team. So, and then Jeff Sims, Jeff Sims is a talented guy that Matt Rule was able to get out of the transfer portal. He played for 3 years as a starter at Georgia Tech. And, he took his lumps there. Georgia Tech didn't have a great cast around him, but he still was very productive as a thrower and a runner. And I think that's what they're going to use him in offensively at Nebraska. Marcus Satterfield is the offensive coordinator, came from South Carolina. And I think they're excited about Jeff Sims and what he brings to their offense. So, and the fact that he is a dual threat, so I think he has a chance to have an impact. But of all of them, right off the bat and in year one, Cade McNamara, I think, is the guy.
It kind of strikes me, Todd, going through all the quarterbacks who are coming in as transfers and expected to play a big role immediately, start right away. And I wonder if that's just going to be the way of the world. Is it somewhat a function of some of the new coaches in some of these spots, or are the days of recruiting that 5-star as a freshman and then watching him bloom and play a bunch of games for you? I mean, is that going by the wayside now? Are we going to see this many transfer quarterbacks come in every other year for some of these programs, you think, Todd?
Yeah, I do think that's, unfortunately or fortunately, it is kind of a trend, and I think that for a couple reasons. I think a lot of young quarterbacks, they aren't patient anymore. If they sign somewhere and they're not playing after a year or a year and a half, they're going to look for somewhere else to go, and that's just the way of the world. I mean, you're not going to see guys put their time in and wait and start playing as a junior or senior. Those days are kind of gone when you're dealing with these high level recruits. And that makes it difficult even having depth at that position, and that's one of the problems that creates is, you may have a great starter, but there might be a big drop off between your number one and number two at that position, more so than other positions on your team, because it's really hard to keep, a couple, two, and definitely not 3 high-level quarterbacks, or guys you could trust to put in there and play and win for you on a weekly basis. It's hard to keep that on your roster nowadays.
We've almost touched on a lot of the players in the Big Ten this year, but one team we haven't talked about at all is a team that has been competing for Big Ten titles not too recent past, and that's the Michigan State Spartans and Mel Tucker. And with Kenneth Walker, they were awesome. They were running the ball. That offense looked amazing. He goes and they put in a 5-7 season. Where do you think they are right now? State of the Spartans program.
Yeah, that's probably the what is it, $60,000 question? Probably
yeah.
Inflation has probably raised that quite a bit now. That's the biggest question, I think, because Mel Tucker, a lot like Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, really hit the portal hard and struck gold with Kenneth Walker and some other players, and that was a really good football team. They went back to the portal again this past year, and it didn't pan out as well, and they struggled. So, I think that you've got to find that balance. And Mel's an excellent recruiter, and he came from places, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, where he knows all about recruiting and the importance of recruiting. But you got to find that balance of recruiting and developing high school kids and trying to find people that can help you out of the portal and fill needs right away. And so we'll see. I think they've seen the good of it. They've seen the bad of it. I'm anxious to see what Mel's team looks like this year. Now, I was really surprised, honestly, that Peyton Thorne, who was a 2-year starting quarterback, decided to go in the transfer portal after spring, just because they said it was going to be open for competition. He chose to leave and ended up at Auburn with Hugh Freeze. And then, Keon Coleman, their best wide receiver, also went into the portal and ended up at Florida State. So, to me, those are 2 big losses, but at the same time, we'll see what Michigan State, what they put together and put on the field. And I think how they start and how they play early in the year, I know they've got a big early test against Washington, and Michael Penix Jr., who is one of the top Heisman candidates out of Washington, was a transfer from Indiana. How they play early, I think, will go a long way in just kind of setting the tone for what Michigan State's going to be like this year.
Yeah, huge game for them early on that can be seen exclusively on Peacock. I am wearing the NBC logo, so I have to slip that in every once in a while, Todd. So Northwestern was a 1-win team last year in the Big Ten. I hate to go negative here, but if you're going to look at one team in the Big Ten that it could be a long season, the rebuilding process is still a couple of years away. There could be some trouble in their neck of the woods. Where's the one team in the Big Ten where you're like, they got a lot of work to do in this coming season?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I would say it stays in Evanston. I think it's still Northwestern. And, I think Pat Fitzgerald is a great coach and one of the all-time good guys in college football, and the perfect fit for Northwestern. Was a 2-time All-American linebacker there. The problem in today's culture or today's world of college football, teams like Nebraska have it tough. First of all, transfer portal, you're not going to get a lot of kids that can come into that school and compete academically and make it there. And they've got to be able to do that. And number 2, Northwestern they're behind and may never catch some of the other teams, not just in the country, but in their league in terms of NIL and some of the things that are going on with that. So it's always going to be more of a challenge for them because of, those 2 things and how it's changed college football. But if there's anybody that can get it turned around, it's Pat. He bleeds purple and white, and his team always kind of embodies him. And I'm hoping they can, because I think the world of Pat.
Well, you mentioned that, the college football landscape is better when storied programs like Nebraska are good. I think it's also better when plucky underdogs like Northwestern make a run and give some challenges to some of the top teams in the league. So I would be all about that. All right, let's finish with this one. Taking a look at the totality of the Big Ten, how do you think it compares to the best of the SEC, the best of the Big 12, the best of the Pac, whatever we're at right now, 12?
Right.
So, what do you think strength of the Big Ten, top to bottom, and maybe some of those top teams out there, how do they stack up?
Well, I think, first of all, when you take the top teams, last year the Big Ten had 2 teams in the college football playoff. Now, granted, neither one of them won. Michigan lost an exciting game to TCU, which I had the privilege of covering. That game is my last game at ESPN, and it was an incredible football game. And Ohio State lost a nail biter to Georgia, the eventual national champion. So I think at the top level, I think they're right there. I think that the Big Ten has closed the gap in the top to bottom of the league, comparing, the SEC and the Big Ten. I think it used to be the SEC had a little more of an edge top to bottom, primarily because of the strength of their defensive lines and the depth of defensive lines that were different to me in the SEC than any other part of the country. But I think the Big Ten has closed that gap. As I look at the big picture, I think the Big 12 is the third right now, and they've got 4 new teams coming into the league. And I think the ACC and the Pac-12 are a little bit behind. And really, with money driving it and the economics of college football, right now the SEC and the Big Ten are continuing to distance themselves from the other leagues in terms of TV contracts. And then starting next year, when the college football playoff expands, you also have Oklahoma and Texas moving into the SEC, and you have USC and UCLA moving into the Big Ten, which is going to really enhance both of those conferences even more. So I think, I think the Big Ten and the SEC are just kind of setting the pace and kind of neck and neck with each other, even though the SEC has won more championships. I think the Big Ten is able to hold their own right now there. And those other 3 conferences, and I'm not sure what the future of the Pac-12 is going to be. I think the Big 12 of those other 3, the Big 12 right now is kind of in the best situation, even though the ACC's got some outstanding football teams, particularly Clemson and Florida State coming into this season, both expected to, make a run at their conference championship. The big picture, the financial picture, the TV contract picture, it's SEC, Big Ten, and then I think Big 12 is third, and the other 2 are behind that.
Yeah, and that's where it is right now. You wonder the next couple of years, as that gap, will it continue to grow as the Big Ten starts cashing some of these big NBC checks and Fox and CBS too. It'll be interesting to track for sure. Big Ten Saturday night coming this fall to NBC and Peacock. Be sure to tune in for the first Big Ten games on NBC and Peacock this season. Saturday, September 2nd, Michigan hosting East Carolina, and Penn State welcoming West Virginia. To catch all of our college football content this season, you can check out the NBC Sports website and our YouTube channels. Todd Blackledge, it is a pleasure having you with us this year. I was so pumped when I heard that news. We just got to get you some NBC gear now. I don't know if you have polos or not.
I do have some. I do have a hat. I didn't wear my NBC hat, but I do have a little gear. Okay. I like that shirt, though. That's nice. Yeah.
All decked out. We'll get you one of these. There are plenty of them. They hand them out like candy when you're in the building there. So right. So Todd, I can't wait to get on the field and cover some of these games with you this year. That was a great look at some of the big storylines this year, and I'm sure we'll do this again soon sometime, Todd.
Sounds great. Great to be with you. Can't wait for the season now.